All right, think about this for a second. A full-scale war. I'm talking naval bombardment, hundreds of casualties, the whole 9 yards. And it was all over in less time than it takes to watch an episode of your favorite TV show. It sounds totally made up, doesn't it? But believe it or not, back in 1896, this actually happened. We're about to dive into the story of the shortest war ever.
38 minutes. That's it. That's the official Guinness World Record for the shortest war in history, and it belongs to the Anglo-Zanzibar War. I mean, from the first shot fired to the final flag coming down, it was swift, it was brutal, and it was unbelievably decisive. And in those few minutes, the entire future of a nation was changed forever.
So the big question is, how? I mean, how on earth can a war be shorter than your favorite sitcom? And the answer, well, it's not just as simple as one side was way stronger. Sure, that's part of it, but it's really a story about clashing empires, a very suspicious death, and a single piece of paper, a treaty, that basically set a time bomb ticking.
Okay, so to really get how this all went down, we need to go back in time. Picture this. It's August 27th, 1896, in the Sultanate of Zanzibar. You're in Stone Town, and the air, it's not just hot and sticky, it's electric with tension. You've got a royal palace completely locked down, barricaded from the inside. And just out in the harbor, the massive, intimidating warships of the British Royal Navy are just sitting there, waiting.
So what was the spark that lit this fuse? Well, it was a classic power struggle. Just a couple of days earlier, on August 25th, the pro-British Sultan, he died, really suddenly. And let's just say a lot of people thought it was pretty suspicious. Before the British could even react and put their chosen guy on the throne, someone else saw their chance and made a big move.
And that someone was Khalid bin Barghash. Now, Khalid was already suspected of, well, poisoning his cousin to get him out of the way. He decided he wasn't going to wait around for British permission. Nope. He storms the palace, gets his followers together, and just declares himself the new sultan. And you have to understand, this wasn't just some local political drama. This was him looking the entire British Empire square in the eye and daring them to do something about it.
And by doing that, he basically handed the British Empire the perfect excuse. He gave them what's known as a casus belli. That's a fancy term for a legitimate reason to go to war. Khalid's move wasn't just defiant. It was a public slap in the face to British authority. And you can bet they were ready to respond. But really, this one act, it didn't just come out of nowhere. It was more like the straw that broke the camel's back.
See, to really get why this all blew up in just 38 minutes, we have to zoom out a bit. This wasn't some random fight that just broke out. This was the fiery conclusion to decades of British imperial planning and maneuvering in East Africa. It's a textbook example of something called gunboat diplomacy.
So why Zanzibar? Why did the British Empire care so much about this one little island? Well, it really boiled down to three main things. First, power. They were in the middle of the scramble for Africa, competing hard with Germany, and they needed every advantage. Second, profit. Zanzibar was a key strategic point on the shipping routes to India, which was, the crown jewel of their empire. And third, well, you could call it principle. Britain had made a big public deal about wanting to end the global slave trade, and Zanzibar was one of the largest, most infamous slave markets in the world.
And Britain was smart about this. They didn't just rely on brute force. They used paperwork to slowly tighten their grip. Back in 1890, they got Zanzibar to sign a couple of key agreements. One treaty basically gave Britain total control of the island in exchange for a tiny island in Europe. Then another agreement made Zanzibar an official British protectorate. But here's the kicker, the really crucial part. Buried in the fine print was a clause that said any new sultan had to be approved by the British. That right there, that was the tripwire. And Khalid had just stomped all over it.
All right, so let's get back to 1896. The stage is set. Britain has its legal excuse. Its massive imperial interests are on the line, and the countdown has officially begun. You've got Khalid barricaded inside his palace with around 2,800 loyal defenders. And outside, those British warships are just sitting in the harbor, their huge guns pointed directly at the palace. Yeah, the time for talking was definitely over. The British consul on the island sent a message to Khalid, and the ultimatum was chillingly simple. It basically said, you have until 9 a.m. tomorrow to take down your flag and get out of the palace. If you don't, we will open fire. There was no room for negotiation. It was absolute. And Khalid, maybe he was arrogant, maybe he just didn't believe they'd actually do it, but he refused. He called their bluff.
I mean, just take a look at the two sides here. It's almost comical if it wasn't so serious. On one side, you've got the most powerful navy in the world, with modern cruisers and gunboats. On the other,
You've got about 2,800 palace defenders, a few ancient cannons, and a single royal yacht that had a gun mounted on it. This wasn't a fair fight. It was a staggering, almost unbelievable mismatch of power, and everybody on both sides knew it.
So, 9 a.m. on August 27th arrives. The deadline passes. The palace flag is still flying. For 2 long, agonizingly tense minutes, everything is silent. You could probably hear a pin drop across the harbor. And then, the British admiral gives the order. The bluff was called. And the world was about to witness a brutal, lightning-fast lesson in imperial power.
And at 9:02 a.m., all hell breaks loose. The British ships just erupt. The sound is deafening. High explosive shells start slamming into the palace, which is mostly made of wood, and it just disintegrates. It splinters and bursts into flames. Just a few minutes in, the Sultan's one and only armed yacht, the HHS Glasgow, gets off one shot in defiance and is immediately sunk. By 9:40 a.m., the palace is a burning wreck, its cannons are silent, and the Sultan's flag is finally shot down. And just like that, silence. It was all over.
And what about Khalid, the man who started this whole thing? Did he go down with the ship, so to speak? Nope. While his palace was being blown to bits and his men were dying, he snuck out a back door and made a run for the German consulate nearby. He was granted asylum, leaving everyone else to deal with the absolute carnage he'd caused. He eventually managed to escape the country. So, in the span of a coffee break, Zanzibar's sovereignty had literally gone up in smoke. And as the rubble of the palace smoldered, the long-term consequences of that very short, very violent morning were already being carved into history.
And if you want to understand just how lopsided this was, you only need to look at the human cost. For the Zanzibaris, around 500 defenders were killed or wounded. And on the British side, the grand total of their casualties was 1. One sailor who was slightly injured. That's it. This right here shows you the terrifying efficiency of a 19th century industrial war machine against a pre-industrial force. With the smoke still clearing, Britain moved incredibly fast to consolidate its power. Step 1, they immediately put their own hand-picked pro-British Sultan on the throne. Step 2, they used their new position of absolute power to force that new Sultan to officially abolish slavery the very next year, a major goal for them. And then, step 3, and this one is just incredible. They handed Zanzibar the bill. They forced the defeated Sultanate to pay reparations to cover the cost of the shells they had just used to demolish the palace.
So, what's the lasting legacy of these 38 minutes? Well, for Zanzibar, it was the end. The end of any real independence it had left. For the history books, it became the textbook example of what gunboat diplomacy actually looks like. And for the British Empire, the message they sent was so loud, so clear, and so brutal that nobody dared to challenge their rule in Zanzibar again for nearly 70 years.
And that really brings us to the final thought here. It's easy to look at the Anglo-Zanzibar War as just a weird piece of historical trivia, the answer to a quiz question. But it's so much more than that. It's a stark, powerful lesson. A war won in minutes led to a nation's sovereignty being lost forever. And it really makes you think, what does the shortest war in history truly teach us about power? Maybe it's that while an empire can be built slowly on treaties and trade, its true absolute dominance can be proven in just a matter of minutes.